Hello everyone, and it's B1B Flyer here, and this tutorial will be about cockpit jeweling. We're going to use black, dark green, goblin green, and white. I'm going to use a Windsor Kolinsky Sable brush, a Windsor Series 7 Zero brush. Starting out with this Grasshopper and with the Cyclops for two different styles there. We've got the round and I've got the sort of a more traditional cockpit on the Grasshopper, so we'll do both of those in this tutorial. I've got some distilled water ready. And now I'm going to be putting those four colors up onto my palette using just a single drop of each paint. I do this because I don't always like to mix up a slow dry or a drying retardant to when I'm doing cockpits, just because it really can cause problems when I want to get the whole thing done, and you kind of need to wait for some of those layers to dry. So since it's such a small area, if you keep your paints well thinned, this technique works out really well, at least for me. If you're having problems, then maybe cut down the number of colors, but what you want to do is kind of work in order from darkest to lightest. So I've got my black, my dark green, and the goblin green, and then the white. And then while I'm on that surface there, I'll end up mixing between the two to kind of get hybrids of each color to help smooth those transitions. So I'd really turn these four colors into 6 or 7 separate colors. And even though it's a small surface area, it really does make a difference, and it actually cuts down on the amount of work you need to do. So you see there, I take the opposite end of my brush, I dip it in the water, get one little tiny drop on the end of the brush, and that's how I thin my paints for jeweling like this. I'm just adding just a touch. You won't see me add any to the white. It's actually pretty thin from the bottle, as I added some water to the bottle. So, but in all likelihood, you'll need to thin the white out. It tends to dry a lot quicker. So getting started here on the Grasshopper, I would always start my cockpits with black. That doesn't mean you have to. You can start with maybe a green or a red or whatever base color you want to use, just something darker to transition from. So I'm going to just go ahead and put that black down, because what I want is a little bit of wet paint there to start working these greens into the color from the dark side, and then kind of get that transition from dark to light. So I'm just adding just a touch of the dark green, and I prefer to highlight the bottom edge of a cockpit just because it reflects kind of the ground, and the highlight or the white dots that you would normally see if you were to paint them would be on the high side. I always gloss my cockpits, so I just paint the color on the bottom and then I put a clear coat over it, and then I let the natural light, whatever's in the ambient light, make that little bit of that highlight sheen. But if you want to do the little white dots, then just, you typically want those on the high side for the lensing effect. So right now I'm just taking that paint and I'm kind of working over fairly liberally with the black and the dark green, because that's the biggest area of transition. So now I'm just trying to make a little bit more of a darker green over the black, just to make it a little bit more pronounced. Note I keep taking my brush and getting the water off of it. I also recommend you use a mug or a cup with to keep your brush clean, because if you get that paint too watery and it starts getting up into the ferrule, you'll ruin your brush. So just keep that in mind when you're doing stuff like this, is that you do also want to take the time to completely cleanse your brush every now and then, just to get anything that might be working its way up the bristles in. So I'm using tiny strokes. I'm not trying to put down a whole ton of paint or a definite line. I'm just almost at sometimes just a little bit of a touch. So now I'm going to start taking that goblin green, and I'm just going to start working in little strokes to help that darker green blend with that goblin green and do some of the work on its own, because it's still slightly damp. You don't need to be super rushed. Obviously you don't want to keep waiting, but don't feel like you absolutely have to be super fast. If your paints are thinned fairly well, you'll still have a little bit of working time in between. And again, that'll vary by preference, but your paints and your technique and all that might be a little bit different. So now I'm working up a really fairly thin white with some goblin green. It's probably a little bit lighter than I would go ordinarily, but that'll help contrast here and show where I'm putting these edge highlights. And the nice thing is if you do it too bright, you can always go over it with just a little bit more goblin green, or maybe mix a little bit back in, just like I am here, and that'll subdue some of that white. That also helps kind of bring that white edge down to a little bit finer, thinner line without you actually having to paint that super thin line. You see this is going pretty quickly. It's relatively close to being done. Let me get the camera to focus here. Add a little bit more of that white just to give it a little bit finer definition, just to catch your eye on that outside edge. And there we have it. That's pretty close to what I would say is done. I might just touch up the black a little bit, maybe a little green to kind of work on that high side transition away from the lighter side, but I'm happy with what it is right here. But I'm just going to go ahead and demonstrate what you can do as a finishing, just to kind of blend that black to dark green and make that top side transition look just a little bit better. And for such a small area, you may not want to do that, but for something like this where I'm demonstrating different techniques, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I probably, like I said, would have stopped a little bit earlier, but I'm happy to kind of go all out and show you all these. All right, refocus here and let you get a look at the details. And there you have it. So now I'll let it dry, and then eventually, once I'm done clear coating the miniature, I will put some gloss on it, and it will look like cockpit glass with some green reflection. Now onto the Cyclops. It's got a flat, round surface. I like to leave a little bit of that edge around the cockpit just to make it look like there's some sort of housing around it. And then additionally, with the colors, I also like to leave a little bit of a black lip or a black edge around it, because maybe that's an area where the light's not quite reflecting, or it really kind of simulates more of a curved shape, or a not a perfectly flat shape, because there's that very fine edge around where the light is catching. So again, I'm starting with that darker black and green, just trying to get some media onto the surface there to start blending from, and then moving up with the Goblin green, kind of doing a crescent shape here. Now these you can go very small, or you can transition from nearly the entire upper side. Again, I'm doing the bottom right here, so you could start your transition much higher if you prefer more of a lens. And you can see some of the other artists on Camo Specs and throughout the some of the other pages with miniatures like these Battletech miniatures, where you'll see a much larger lensing effect, and that's perfectly okay. It's all about your preference. Or if you don't want to paint it so small because it's a little bit more difficult, you're still learning, hey, start bigger and then maybe work your way down if that's what you want to do. So now you can see that darker area on the top. The thing you want to avoid here, and I think even I'm guilty of this from time to time, is not getting a crescent. If you go, what your tendency is to do is going to want to be just painting like it's a half circle. So by the end of this, I will go back and touch it up and actually probably go over some of the work that I've done with the transitioning, just to make sure it looks more like a crescent instead of just a half circle, because it kind of loses that lensing effect if you just do it halfway. Okay, working with the white a little bit, again, kind of overstating that white, knowing that I'm going to blend it back with that Goblin green. So you can see it's a pretty heavy line, but no big deal, because now I'm going to hit that Goblin green, or, well, here you can see I'm just blending some of that white back towards the inner side, and that'll help subdue it some as well. And now working in the Goblin green, kind of a little bit of a gradient down from the lighter white. Now with the dark green, I've got three colors on there now. I've got the white, I've got the intermediate Goblin green and white, and I've got that dark green. So now I can bring in that Goblin green and then kind of just split the difference between all of it. And now you can see that transition starts to really appear, even though I haven't used any retarder. And I'm just barely kind of, let's say, dabbing, not with the point, but off at a 45-degree angle. And what that does is it lets the paint do the work for you. The less work you have to do directly, the better. And I do end up getting just a slight little black spot here where I didn't get enough paint. And all I do is just dab a little bit on there and then just let it be for a few moments. Don't try to work that area and then go back, and you can transition it a little bit later with a thinned transition color. Maybe a little more definition to that white just on the outer edge, just to give a little bit more emphasis on that bottom crescent. And then work that transition again. And you can see how that half circle shape is somewhat developing, and I will rectify that by the end, but it's just a natural tendency, at least that I have, to try to, not necessarily make that crescent go all the way around, but it's very easy to blend through. And I've also kept that little black lip around the outer edge. If I were to make a mistake, I've got some thin black there and I can just touch up the edges pretty easily. I'm working that dark green and black mixture. Just some final touch-ups here just to make a little bit more of a blend. It's a little heavy on the white down at the bottom there, so I'm going to try to subdue some of that. It's getting pretty close. I've kind of worked that crescent shape back now again, gotten some of that lighter color out of the middle. Touch up a little more black, give a little bit more contrast from the high side to the low side. And there you have it. Let's refocus here. And that's how I do my lensing effects and cockpit jeweling. As you can see, once you've got a nice little system down, it doesn't take a whole lot of extra effort. Of course, it's nice to have a bigger area to work on, but a good quality brush, some patience, and well-thinned paints, and having a plan will definitely set you up for success. Like I said, this is what I use. I'll use this Vallejo gloss varnish. I also have some Games Workshop old school, like 10 years old varnish that I really like too. But either one of them will give you a nice clear shine on the finished model once you're done sealing it with a matte color, matte coat. So there you have it. Appreciate what all you subscribers have been doing. Please continue to watch. Look out for more. Thanks for watching. Visit camospecs.com and our Facebook page. Goodbye.